The room went dead silent. 2:47 a.m. Trauma Bay 4. A stretcher wheeled through the sliding doors with a man whose chest wasn't moving right, shallow, labored, like something inside was crushing his lungs from within. Blast injuries. Shrapnel embedded in the anterior thorax. Blood pressure 70/40 and dropping. The resident, Dr. Chen, 28 years old and 4 months into his trauma rotation, looked at the monitor and froze. The entire nursing staff watched through the observation windows. 30 seconds of nothing. The kind of nothing that kills people. Ashley Cooper didn't run. She moved like water finding a path downhill, no wasted motion, no panic, just the fluid precision of someone who had already survived the worst thing the world had to offer. She was at the stretcher before the resident's hand stopped shaking. What's his pressure now? Still dropping. 68, maybe 66. Chen's voice cracked. I can't hear breath sounds on the left side. There's muffled heart tones and cardiac tamponade. 3 words. Not a question. The kind of diagnosis that arrives fully formed when you've seen it before, when your hands remember what your mind tries to forget. Get me a 14-gauge needle. 1.5 inch. Syringe. Betadine. The equipment appeared in her hands like it was drawn by magnetism. A nurse she'd trained 6 months ago, Rachel, scared and sharp, had the supplies ready before Ashley even finished speaking. This was muscle memory that transcended nursing school. This was Fallujah. This was a tent with canvas sides and mortar fire walking closer, closer, and a soldier whose lungs were drowning in his own blood while she did the only thing that might keep him breathing long enough to matter. The man on the stretcher was conscious. Terrified. His eyes locked on Ashley's face with the desperation of someone watching a door that might close forever. She didn't look away. She let him see her hands, steady, certain, carved from something harder than fear. We're going to fix this. You're going to feel pressure. Not pain. Pressure. What's your name? Marcus. His voice was the sound of a man breathing through a straw. Captain. Marcus Hale. The name hit her like a physical blow. The room tilted. Her vision tunneled for exactly 1 second, the time it took to recognize a face she'd spent 3 years trying to forget, a voice she'd heard in courtrooms and nightmares, the man who'd signed the papers that dismantled her military career after Fallujah broke something she couldn't repair. The man who'd testified that she'd disobeyed a direct order. The man who'd been right. She didn't flinch. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. Captain. Her voice dropped half an octave. Breathe for me. Slow. In through your nose. Ashley prepped the site, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right side of his sternum. The betadine made a rust-colored stain against his pallid skin. Around her, the nursing staff had gone motionless. Even Dr. Chen, frozen and useless, seemed to understand he was watching something he'd only read about in textbooks. This wasn't protocol. This was beyond protocol. This was a nurse with trauma shears clipped to her pocket and a broken dog tag hidden under her scrubs, and 30 seconds before a human heart stopped pumping entirely. The 14-gauge needle was cold metal. The syringe was attached and empty, waiting to breathe. Ashley's hands positioned themselves with the automaticity of prayer, not thinking, just knowing, because some knowledge lives in muscle and bone, and the terrible clarity that comes from holding too many people as they bled out. Breathe, Captain. She pushed in. The needle sank through skin. Through the fibrous membrane. Through the pericardial sac. The resistance changed. The texture shifted under her fingers from tissue to something else, something wet and wrong. She pulled the plunger. Dark blood, almost black, filled the syringe. 50 milliliters of the reason his heart couldn't beat properly. 50 milliliters of compressed space and pressure, and a man drowning while standing upright. The monitor changed. BP 72. 75, 78. O2 sat climbed, 71 to 78 to 84. Heart rate steadied from 142 to 118 to 106. The stretcher's wheels squeaked as someone exhaled. Rachel's hands were shaking so badly she dropped the gauze she'd been holding ready. Dr. Chen's face had gone the color of old concrete. Through the observation windows, Ashley could feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes, senior nurses who'd been working at Mercy General for 20 years, residents who'd trained at Johns Hopkins and Duke, all of them watching a night shift nurse do something their credentials said she shouldn't be able to do and couldn't have done better. Clean gauze. Pressure. Ashley's voice was still that lower register, the one that came from some part of her that predated scrubs and name tags and the decision to hide. Run a chest X-ray. Get me 2 units of O negative. Have surgery standing by for thoracotomy if this is still bleeding. She didn't wait for confirmation. The instructions moved around the room like wind through a canyon, other nurses moving now, picking up the momentum, and even Chen seemed to remember that he was supposed to be a doctor and started writing orders on the chart with the shaky concentration of a man learning to write again. The doors to Trauma Bay 4 opened. Dr. Prescott stepped through with his laptop under one arm and his hair still holding the shape of a pillow on one side. He'd been sleeping. He'd been called in, probably, the same way trauma surgeons get called when something catastrophic arrives at 2:47 a.m. with blast injuries and a crashing blood pressure. He surveyed the scene, the monitor showing stable vitals, the syringe in a tray labeled with dark blood aspirated from pericardial sac, the patient's face no longer wearing the expression of a man watching his own death arrive. Dr. Prescott's eyes moved across the room with the precision of a security camera. Landed on Ashley. Stayed there for exactly 3 seconds. His jaw clenched. His shoulders straightened. The expression that crossed his face was something between confusion and recognition, not of her, but of something he'd seen before and hated. A threat he didn't have a name for yet. He pulled out his phone. Not to call surgery. Not to check the labs. Not to do anything that resembled actual medical work. He began photographing the scene. The stretcher. The monitor. The syringe. The patient. Ashley's hands, which she was already removing from Captain Hale's chest in preparation for what came next. Dr. Prescott moved methodically, the way a man might document a crime scene. Each photograph felt deliberate. Clinical. Careful. Dr. Prescott. Ashley's voice was back to its normal register, measured, professional, the voice of a nurse addressing a physician. Captain Hale is stable but needs surgery evaluation. Do you want me to call the attending, or? I'll handle it. His eyes didn't leave his phone screen. Click. 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 The flash fired 3 more times, catching her from different angles. When he finally looked at her, something in his expression had solidified into certainty. You performed an invasive procedure on a patient without physician oversight. It wasn't a question. Cardiac tamponade. The patient was in extremis. The resident was unable to. I know what you did. He lowered the phone. His smile was the smile of a man who'd just discovered a gift he didn't know he wanted. We'll be discussing this with administration. Stand by. He walked out of Trauma Bay for the way a man walks out of a room where he's just won something valuable. Something he could convert into power. The room breathed again. Rachel was still holding gauze. Captain Hale's eyes were closed, his breathing easier now, the terrible gasping quality gone. Dr. Chen was checking the monitor readout with the concentration of a man who'd been given a second chance and understood exactly how close he'd come to blowing it. Ashley cleaned her hands at the sink. The water was warm. The soap smelled like industrial lavender and regret. She could feel them, all 30 pairs of eyes, even with the observation windows between them and her, even with the glass that turned watching into performance. She could feel the weight of what she'd just done shifting in the air, changing from rescue into transgression, from competence into threat. She dried her hands on paper towel. Rachel, stay with him. 2 units running. Get the X-ray up on the system and page surgery the moment it's done. Yes. Rachel's voice had changed. Not just obedience, there was something else in it now. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that the woman she'd been taking orders from for 6 months was something other than what her badge said. Ashley walked out of Trauma Bay for at 2:53 a.m., when Captain Marcus Hale's blood pressure was 92/58 and climbing, and his oxygen saturation was holding steady at 94%, and his heart was beating in sinus rhythm for the first time in what felt like forever. She didn't know that Dr. Prescott was already in the administrative office, beginning to document. Didn't know that the photographs were being uploaded to a secure folder with the title "A Nursing Protocol Violation, Invasive Procedure Without Physician Authorization." Didn't know that what she'd just done, what she'd just saved, was going to become the reason her life imploded. But she could feel it coming. The way animals feel weather changing before it arrives. The way soldiers feel the ground shift seconds before it explodes. The next words out of Prescott's mouth were going to end her career at Mercy General. They just didn't know it yet. The staff meeting at Mercy General ran exactly 23 minutes before Dr. Prescott decided to end it early with a public execution. Ashley sat in the third row of the conference room, her hands folded on the polished table, listening to the nursing director drone through quarterly metrics. 15 people present. Administrative staff. Floor nurses. 2 residents. Prescott leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, his Italian leather shoes propped against the mahogany in a way that said the room belonged to him. The morning light through the windows was pale and cold, the kind of November light that made everything look slightly grey. "Cooper." His voice cut through the director's sentence like surgical steel. "Since you're so confident giving cardiac advice, explain the contraindications for amiodarone, digoxin, metoprolol, lisinopril, warfarin, furosemide, spirolactone, nitroglycerine, aspirin, clopidogrel, atorvastatin, and carvedilol. Right now." The room exhaled. Silence bloomed across the table like spilled ink spreading through water. 12 medications. 12 potential traps. Every nurse in that room understood what was happening. Prescott was hunting, and he'd chosen his moment carefully. The director's pen stopped moving. A resident looked at her shoes. Ashley didn't move. Didn't breathe faster. Her eyes met Prescott's with the flat, cold clarity of someone who had already died once and found it remarkably unhelpful. 10 seconds stretched between them like a tightrope. His smile widened because he thought he'd already won. "Amiodarone contradicts in decompensated heart failure and second or third degree AV block," she said, voice level as surgical steel. "Digoxin contraindicated in Wolff-Parkinson White. Metoprolol in severe bradycardia and cardiogenic shock. Lisinopril in pregnancy and bilateral renal artery stenosis. Warfarin contraindicated in active bleeding, thrombocytopenia below 50,000. Furosemide in severe dehydration and acute kidney injury. Spirolactone in hyperkalemia and renal failure. Nitroglycerine in right ventricular infarction. Aspirin in active GI bleed and severe thrombocytopenia. Clopidogrel in bleeding disorders. Atorvastatin in active liver disease. Carvedilol in acute decompensation and severe hypertension." She paused. Her jaw moved once, a single clench so slight only someone trained to read micro-expressions would catch it. It must be exhausting, Dr. Prescott, needing to humiliate others just to feel adequate. She stood. Pushed her chair back with deliberate slowness. Walked toward the door while the room remained so completely silent you could hear the fluorescent lights humming above the table like insects trapped in glass. Prescott's face had gone the color of old brick. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, a fish struggling in air that had become thin enough to cut. She didn't look back. The door closed. 15 people stared at the space where she'd been standing, each of them understanding in that moment that Dr. Prescott had just tried to break someone and discovered the break was going to be in him instead. But that wasn't the worst part for Prescott. The worst part was that she'd done it without raising her voice. 3 days later, the fluorescent strip lighting in the parking garage flickered overhead like a dying animal, and Ashley pushed the call button for the elevator that connected the hospital basement to the surgical ward. Her shift had ended 30 minutes ago. Her scrubs were still damp at the collar from a patient's blood work, type and cross for a trauma case that had resolved in the ICU. The elevator doors slid open with the pneumatic hiss of compressed air. She stepped inside. Prescott stepped in behind her. He waited until the doors began to close. Then he extended his arm and blocked the door sensor, forcing it open again, trapping the elevator on this floor. His face had evolved from red to something more dangerous, a controlled fury that had spent the last 72 hours fermenting into strategy. Up close, he smelled like expensive cologne and coffee breath and the particular musk of wounded ego. "You need to understand something, Cooper." His voice was soft now, which made it worse. Soft voices in confined spaces are the ones that carry threats. "You need to understand your place in this hospital." Ashley stood facing the closed doors, her hands at her sides, her breathing unchanged. She could feel his proximity like a barometer reading a pressure drop. His arm remained blocking the sensor. Violating her space. Testing boundaries. "You're a nurse," he continued, moving closer. The elevator was approximately 4 feet wide. He used 2 of them. "That means you follow orders. You don't question physicians. And you certainly don't embarrass them in front of staff. Do we have an understanding?" She turned her head slowly. Her eyes moved to his face with the precision of a targeting system. Then she leaned toward him, not away, but toward, and whispered so quietly he had to strain to hear it. "You're not half the doctor your patients need, but you're exactly the one they deserve." She moved to his left, ducked beneath his arm with the fluid efficiency of someone who understood spatial geometry and human reflex, and stepped out onto the 4th floor as the elevator doors slid shut behind her. Behind the closing doors, she saw his reflection in the stainless steel, face white now, not red, his hand still raised in the blocked position, his mouth opening and closing with no sound emerging. The doors sealed. The elevator descended. He was alone in a metal box, and the worst part was that he knew exactly how he'd gotten there. The next shift, Ashley opened her locker on the 3rd floor nurse station. The smell hit her first, acrylic paint, sharp and chemical. Inside the metal door, spray painted in violent red letters, "Wannabe MD." The paint still had a slight sheen, not fully cured. Fresh. Less than 12 hours old. She stood there for 6 seconds without moving, her eyes taking in the crude letters, her mind cataloging the implications. Spray paint wasn't something you obtained quietly. It wasn't something you used without witnesses. Someone had done this knowing they might be seen, or not caring if they were. She pulled out her phone. 3 photographs from different angles, the flash casting harsh light on the red paint. She photographed the serial number inside the locker door. She photographed the surrounding lockers to show no one else was vandalized. Then she walked to human resources with the evidence in her phone and a voice that hadn't changed pitch since she'd found the locker. The HR director listened, typed notes, promised an investigation, scheduled the maintenance crew to repaint. Standard protocol for standard harassment. That afternoon, she found Prescott in the hallway outside cardiology. He was walking toward her, his expression carrying the confidence of a man who believed he'd finally found the right leverage. She didn't slow her pace. "Vandalism is the last refuge of a man with nothing intelligent left to say," she said as she passed him, her voice low enough that only he heard it. She kept walking. Didn't pause. Didn't turn around. Didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her face. Behind her, she heard his footsteps stop. That evening, Prescott sat in his office with the hospital bylaws spread across his desk like a general reviewing maps before an invasion. His fingers moved through the pages with the methodical precision of someone who had finally stopped playing and started hunting for real. Regulations. Protocols. Scope of practice. Nursing regulations from 1994. Bylaws amended in 1999. A rarely invoked statute from 2003 that required physician supervision for any invasive procedure, any intervention beyond standard nursing protocols. He began highlighting in yellow, the way a scholar marks passages that confirm a theory. He was building something now. Something that would hold up. Something that would justify what he was about to do. He made 3 phone calls that night. One to the medical director. One to the chief of surgery. One to the hospital administrator. The message was the same in each conversation: Cooper was overstepping. Cooper was performing procedures outside her scope. Cooper was dangerous. And in each call, he made it sound not like a personal vendetta but like a professional concern. Like duty. Like he was protecting the hospital. The whispers spread like infection. Other physicians began to mention her name with hesitation. The nursing director started requesting that Ashley work different floors, different shifts. Unnecessary reassignments that had no official reason but carried the weight of institutional pressure. Prescott was weaponizing the hospital itself, turning protocol into a cudgel, policy into poison. He was still speaking, but now he was speaking in the language of bureaucracy, and in that language, he was fluent. What none of them understood was that they had just set something in motion. They didn't know who was working the night shift on November 14th. They didn't know that in 4 hours, a stretcher would arrive with muffled heart sounds and a vitals list that descended like a stone thrown into dark water. They didn't know that the patient's name would be Captain Marcus Hale, and that the woman they'd been trying to destroy had already survived being destroyed by him once. They didn't know that everything was about to change. The intercom crackled at 2:44 a.m. Code Blue. Incoming trauma from Joint Expeditionary Base, training accident, multiple blast injuries, ETA for minutes. Ashley was restocking the supply cart on the 3rd floor when the announcement came through, and her hands stopped moving. Blast injuries. Her shoulders straightened anyway. The unconscious part of her brain had already registered. Mercy General's trauma bays would fill in under 90 seconds, the attending physicians would mobilize, the dance of controlled chaos would begin. She'd seen it 100 times before. She'd survived it 1,000 times before that. The ER charge nurse, Patricia, spotted her in the hallway. Cooper. Trauma Bay 3. You're with Dr. Prescott on this one. Of course she was. The universe had a sense of timing. Ashley nodded once and moved toward the trauma suite, her stride efficient, her face blank as a surgical mask. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless monotone above her. Her scrubs were still damp from the 2 a.m. code she'd helped run on the 4th floor, a 78-year-old with acute MI who'd stabilized after 40 minutes of work. Now this. She was pulling on her second pair of gloves when the stretcher crashed through the ER doors. Not wheeled. Crashed. The paramedics were calling vital signs over each other, their voices layered and urgent like a radio dispatch from a war zone. The patient's face was partially obscured by oxygen mask, but his chest was exposed, blast trauma, lacerations, contusions blooming purple across his ribs like flowers nobody wanted to see. The left side of his body looked like ground glass had been driven through his skin. BP 94 over 58 and dropping, the paramedic shouted. Heart sounds muffled. We gotten for running, 2 liters wide open, but something's wrong. He's crashing. Ashley moved closer. The patient's jugular veins were distended like rope under his skin. His skin had that gray-white quality that meant perfusion was dying. Muffled heart sounds. Distended JVD. Dropping blood pressure. The clinical presentation crystallized in her mind like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac. The heart's protective membrane drowning the organ it was supposed to protect. The pressure squeezing the heart chambers, cutting cardiac output, shutting down everything downstream. The patient, Captain Marcus Hale, her mind registered from the chart being thrust toward her, the name hitting her sternum like a punch she didn't flinch at, was dying in increments measured in seconds. The on-call resident, Dr. Chen, was standing frozen beside the stretcher. His hands hung at his sides. His eyes had that wide, fixed quality of someone watching their first true emergency, the kind where the textbook answers didn't matter anymore because the patient was dying in front of him and there was nothing theoretical about it. His mouth was open. No words came out. "Get him to the bay," Ashley said. Her voice was steady, flat as a surgical tray. "Full monitor. Type and cross for 4 units. What are we treating for?" Chen's voice cracked on the last word. "Tamponade. Move." The gurney rolled into Trauma Bay 3. The nurses, there were 5 of them now, materializing from the back like they'd been waiting in the walls, swarmed around him with practiced choreography. One cut away the rest of his shirt. One ran leads across his chest. One was calling pharmacy. One was already hanging the 2nd liter of saline, the fluid racing through the full line like it could outrun death if it just moved fast enough. Ashley was already moving. Her hands knew what to do. Her body remembered this. The sterile field came up in seconds. Alcohol swab. The cold antiseptic smell cutting through the other scents, blood, burnt fabric, the metallic tang of exposed flesh. She could feel the weight of eyes on her from the corridor outside the trauma bay. The other nurses were watching through the observation window. Watching to see what would happen next. She pulled the needle and syringe from the crash cart. 14-gauge angiocath. The needle was long and thin and precise, designed for one purpose only. She located the subxiphoid angle, the space below the breastbone where the ribs came together, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this under fire, who'd done this with shaking hands on a stretcher in a helicopter, who'd done this when the alternative was watching someone die and being unable to stop it. "I need you to hold him still," she said to the nurse on the left. Chen was still frozen. "What procedure are you?" "Pericardiocentesis. The blood has to come out or his heart stops." She didn't wait for his response. The needle went in at a 45-degree angle, sliding beneath the skin like she was opening a letter. The syringe plunger came back. Dark blood. Not bright arterial red, darker, thicker, the color of venous blood that had pooled in the wrong place for too long. The blood that was drowning him. 50 milliliters. The first syringe filled. Another syringe. She was drawing the pressure off his heart the way you'd draw water from a flooded basement, methodical, continuous, watching for the moment when it would be enough. Pressure's coming up, the nurse monitoring vitals called out. 98/62. Blood pressure climbing. Oxygen saturation climbing. The monitor beeped its mechanical rhythm, steadier now, the wild arrhythmia settling into something close to normal. Ashley kept working. 20 more milliliters. The second syringe half full. The third. 104/65, the nurse said. O2 sat 94% and rising. Heart sounds are clearing. Through the observation window, the gathered nurses started to applaud. Soft at first, then catching themselves, hands falling away, faces turning back to their stations like they'd been caught doing something they shouldn't. But they'd seen it. They'd all seen it. The moment the syringe came away from the needle, Ashley's right hand tremored. Not a large movement. Just a slight vibration in the fingers, the way a guitar string rings after the note has technically finished playing. She pressed her hand against the gurney. Waited for the trembling to stop. It took for seconds. It felt longer. "How did you, or where did you learn?" Chen's voice was thin, amazed and confused at once. "Get him to CT," Ashley said. She was already documenting. Timestamp, 2:47 a.m. Patient presentation, cardiac tamponade. Procedure, pericardiocentesis, subxiphoid approach. Fluid aspirated, 70 milliliters dark blood from pericardial sac. Post-procedure vitals, stable. Heart sounds, clear. The documentation was precise, clinical, every detail recorded exactly as it had occurred because accuracy mattered and because the paperwork would protect the patient if something went wrong later. The CT techs were already moving the gurney toward the elevator. Captain Hale's eyes were still closed, still unconscious, still alive because the pressure on his heart had been released, because someone had recognized the pattern and moved before the window closed forever. Chen was staring at her. His mouth was trying to form another question. That was when Dr. Prescott arrived. He came through the trauma bay doors with his tablet already in hand, moving like a man who'd heard the code and adjusted his evening routine accordingly. His eye swept across the gurney, the empty bay, Ashley standing in the center of it with her gloves still on. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say good work. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked. What happened here? His voice was the kind of calm that wasn't calm at all, controlled the way a vice was controlled, all the pressure applied from the outside, nothing moving inside. The resident started talking. His voice was fast, full of admiration and disbelief in equal measure. Cooper recognized cardiac tamponade immediately. She performed an emergency pericardiocentesis, textbook procedure. Got 70 milliliters of pericardial fluid off. His pressure stabilized instantly. She saved his life. Dr. Prescott's expression didn't change. He walked to the gurney, surveyed the blood-stained sheets, the empty syringes, the remains of the sterile field. Then he pulled out his phone. Started taking photographs. Close-ups of the equipment. Wide shots of the bay. Documentation shots, the kind that built a case rather than celebrated an outcome. I need statements from everyone present, he said. His eyes never left the room, like he was photographing it with something other than his phone. Like he was building a catalogue. And I'll need to review the patient chart and nursing documentation. The patient was stabilized, Chen said. Uncertainty crept into his voice. She saved him. The patient will be fine. Prescott's tone suggested this was irrelevant. But this facility has protocols. If those protocols were violated, they need to be documented. Thoroughly. He turned to face Ashley directly. His smile was the kind that would look polite in a photograph. I'll need you to submit a complete incident report detailing the procedure you performed outside your scope of practice. He said it like she'd stolen something. Like she'd broken something deliberately. Like the fact that the patient was breathing and conscious and alive was somehow a secondary concern to the administrative paperwork that followed. Of course, Ashley said. Her voice was steady as a surgical saw. She pulled off her gloves and discarded them. I'll have it typed by end of shift. Prescott nodded. He was already typing on his tablet, his thumbs moving fast across the screen. Creating the record. Building the documentation. Turning rescue into violation, one keystroke at a time. Ashley walked out of the trauma bay and into the corridor. The other nurses were pretending not to watch. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and rain from the parking lot and something else, the particular exhaustion that came from surviving something you weren't supposed to survive, from knowing exactly what you'd done and knowing exactly what would come next. She made it to the break room before the realization hit her fully. Captain Marcus Hale. The same officer who'd sat across from her in a court-martial hearing 7 years ago. The same man whose testimony had ended her military career, whose orders she defied to save 12 wounded soldiers on a mission that went catastrophically wrong. The same captain who'd made a choice to destroy her because following orders mattered more than the lives saved when those orders were broken. She'd just saved his life. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. The break room was empty at 2:52 a.m. except for the coffee maker, which gurgled and hissed like it was breathing. Ashley sat down at the plastic table and pressed her hand flat against the surface, watching it stay completely still. No tremor. No sign that anything inside her was coming apart. By 3:17 a.m., her inbox chimed. Email from Dr. Prescott. Subject line, Incident Review Required. She opened it and read, an official investigation has been initiated regarding the unauthorized performance of a surgical procedure in Trauma Bay 3 at approximately 2:47 a.m. You are required to meet with hospital administration at 6 p.m. tomorrow to discuss protocol violations and scope of practice concerns. Bring all documentation related to the above incident. The words felt like someone had written them on glass and shattered the glass inside her chest. But she'd been shattered before. She'd been shattered in Fallujah. She'd been shattered in a courtroom in front of officers in dress blues. She'd been shattered so many times that pieces of her had learned to stay in place through sheer muscle memory alone. She drank the coffee. It was terrible. She drank another cup anyway. By the time her shift ended at 7 a.m., Dr. Prescott had filed a formal complaint with the medical board. He'd photocopied Hospital Regulation 7.4.2, a rarely enforced rule requiring physician supervision for any invasive intervention. He'd interviewed every nurse who'd witnessed the procedure. He'd documented timestamps, photographed equipment, reviewed her medical notes for inconsistencies that didn't exist. He'd spent the night building a paper trail that transformed a life-saving moment into evidence of misconduct. The world was still asleep when she drove home. The sun was coming up over Norfolk like it had something to prove. Like it didn't know that the quiet nurse who'd just saved a man's life in the middle of the night was about to have her career systematically dismantled by someone who'd watched her succeed and decided success was something that needed to be punished. 7 o'clock in the morning, and Ashley's wet scrub still clung to her shoulders like a second skin. The whole drive to Mercy General had been silent, phone dark, mind darker. She'd known, walking to her car at 6:47 a.m., that this was coming. The paperwork had probably started before Hale even left the trauma bay. Prescott's office smelled like old leather and the aggressive cologne of a man trying to perfume over his own inadequacy. His desk was a museum of documentation, incident reports stacked in neat piles, hospital bylaws highlighted in yellow, witness statements laminated and ordered by date. The sunlight through the window caught the edges of the pages like a prosecutor's evidence wall. He didn't invite her to sit. Regulation 4.7.3, Prescott said, not looking up from a printout. His voice had that smooth, almost regretful quality of someone executing a plan that had taken him 3 days to perfect. Nursing scope of practice. No registered nurse may perform invasive procedures without physician supervision. The pericardiocentesis you performed at 2:47 a.m. was classified as a surgical intervention under Hospital Code 6.2.1. Ashley stood with her hands at her sides, her uniform still damp where the cardiac tamponade patient's blood had soaked through. The smell of antiseptic clung to her skin the way it always did, the way it would probably cling to her forever, one of those details that never quite washed off. You exposed this hospital to catastrophic liability, Prescott continued, turning a page with theatrical slowness. The medical board has standards for a reason. Patient safety. Chain of command. Scope of practice exists to protect both the institution and the patients we serve. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, a sound like insects trapped in glass, the eternal white hum of fluorescent martyrdom in every hospital corridor since 1987. Ashley had stopped hearing it years ago. Now it was the loudest sound in the room. Prescott leaned back in his chair, and the leather creaked under his weight like a guilty confession. His eyes finally met hers, searching for something, fear, maybe, or defensiveness. The tremor of someone about to lose something precious. He found neither. What he found was the flat, cold stare of a woman who had held a young soldier's intestines in her hands while mortar fire rained down on a field hospital in Fallujah, and this man's opinion mattered less than the dust on his diploma. "I've filed a formal complaint with the medical board," he said, the words coming faster now, the tick of someone who'd practiced this monologue alone in his car. "I've documented your violation of protocol for point 7.3. I've notified hospital administration. Effective immediately, your employment at Mercy General is terminated. You'll surrender your credentials, your badge, and your access codes before you leave this building." The silence stretched like a held breath. For seconds. 5. Ashley reached up and unpinned her badge from her scrub top. The metal was still warm from her skin. She set it on his desk, and it landed with a small click that sounded like the closing of a door she'd walked through for 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to be quiet, trying to be someone other than who she was. "I have to ask you something," Prescott said, and his voice shifted, less prosecutor now, more confessor. "Someone with your obvious clinical skills, your presence, the way staff responds to you, why would you waste that? Why would someone like you settle for being a mere nurse?" The question was meant to sting. It was calculated to suggest that nursing was a compromise, a stepping stone, a holding pattern for someone too capable to belong in this role. In another version of her life, maybe it would have landed. But Ashley had learned long ago that the worst wounds were never the ones that bled. She didn't answer. She turned, walked to the door, and left him sitting there with his documents and his justifications and his fragile authority that crumbled whenever he realized the people around him didn't respect his title, they pitied his name. The walk to her car took 4 minutes. The drive to the VA hospital took 12. 2 days later, Ashley sat in a waiting room that could have been anywhere in America, institutional beige walls, chairs from a furniture catalogue of disappointment, a coffee machine that had been broken for approximately 6 weeks based on the dust accumulation around the coin slot. The air tasted like fluorescent lights and antiseptic and something else, something harder to name. Fear, maybe. The specific fear of people who learned that the world wasn't safe and nothing could change that fact. The other veterans in the waiting room had that look. Ashley recognized it because she wore it now too, the hollow eyes, the tremor in the hands that came from sleeping with one ear alert to sounds that would never come again. A man across from her rocked slightly, his leg bouncing in a rhythm that matched no music playing in this world. Another stared at his palms like they belonged to someone else. An older woman picked at the fabric of her jacket, pull, 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 her fingers working mechanically through a scar in the weave. Ashley held the intake form in her lap. Have you experienced combat-related trauma? Checkbox. Do you suffer from intrusive memories or flashbacks? Checkbox. Do you experience significant guilt related to survival in high-risk situations? Checkbox. The questions were clinical, professional, designed to sort human suffering into diagnostic categories. She checked all 3. The name on the form she filled out, Ashley Cooper. Occupation, unemployed as of 6 a.m., March 17th. The previous occupation line she left blank. Some things didn't fit in boxes. A nurse called her name, Ashley Cooper. And Ashley stood. Her limp was worse today, the old wound in her left leg aching in the way it did when the weather changed or when she'd been on her feet too long trying to save people who were never going to be saved. This was who she was now, a woman with a combat limp, a medical background nobody would hire, and a disciplinary notice that would follow her through every credentialing application for the rest of her career. Just another broken veteran sitting in a VA waiting room, trying to survive the silence that came after the shooting stopped. The intake counselor was younger than Ashley expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes and the particular exhaustion that came from listening to other people's nightmares 5 days a week. She gestured to a chair in a small office that smelled like hand sanitizer and old coffee. Tell me what happened, the counselor said. Not tell me about your trauma. Not tell me about your military service. Just, what happened? And that's when the phone in Ashley's pocket buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, Major Cooper, this is Derek's teacher. He's left school with something. You should come to Mercy General immediately. Her son. 16 years old. At the hospital. She stood without finishing the intake form, without explaining to the counselor why her hands were suddenly shaking. Not from fear, from the specific clarity that comes when a situation shifts from manageable to critical, when the ticking clock starts and you stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about what needs to happen next. The drive back to Mercy General took 14 minutes. She did it in 11. The administrative wing of Mercy General was never quiet, but it went silent when the doors burst open at 3:14 p.m. Derek Cooper, 16 years old, walked past security like he owned the place. His hands shook as he carried the shadow box. The nurses at the front desk recognized him. He'd been here 100 times, waiting in the cafeteria while his mother saved lives nobody would remember. They didn't recognize what he carried until the afternoon light hit the glass and caught brass. He found his mother's personnel file on the 3rd floor. Found the room where Administrator Wells sat across from Dr. Prescott, both of them reviewing the termination paperwork one more time. Found her name about to be officially erased. Derek pushed the door open. I need you to see these, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. Both men looked up. The boy's trembling wasn't fear, it was the kind of restraint that came from holding something sacred. He opened the shadow box. Rows of medals caught the fluorescent light like colored glass. Bronze Star. Purple Heart. Meritorious Service Medal. Army Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters arranged in a precise line. Below them, on the faded burgundy satin, a single dog tag hung from a broken chain, the metal dented and twisted like a compass that had survived a blast that shouldn't have been survivable. "Those belong to my mom," Derek said. Major Ashley Cooper. 75th Ranger Regiment. "And if you don't know what those mean, you can Google them. But you should know before you sign that." He set the shadow box on the desk. Neither man moved. Derek walked back to the elevator without another word. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then everything changed. A medic named James Holloway was visiting his father on the ICU ward, cardiac patient, stable for 2 days, probably going home by Friday. Holloway worked at the VA hospital now, had since 2015, but he still remembered 2009. He still remembered Fallujah. He was walking past the administrative wing when he saw Derek leaving, saw something in the boy's face that made him stop. He pushed the door open and saw them. Saw the shadow box. Saw the medals. His jaw went tight. "Major Cooper." The words came out like a whisper and a salute at the same time. "You're still here. At this hospital. I've been treating your cases at the VA for 6 years and didn't know you were." He stopped. He looked at Dr. Prescott. "You fired her." It wasn't a question. Within 15 minutes, Captain James Holloway was on the hospital phone calling the chaplain. Not the civilian one. The other one. Father Thomas Mercer, 72 years old, former Army Ranger, who'd jumped out of helicopters for 30 years before God called him to jump into something harder. Mercer arrived in his collar and his boots. He didn't ask for permission. Didn't ask for explanations. Walked straight into Administrator Wells's office, glanced at the shadow box, and began reading aloud like a battle report. His voice was gravel and authority. 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 combat tours. Kandahar Province, 2 deployments. Helmand Province, 1 rotation. Fallujah, attached to Joint Task Force. He tapped 1 medal. "This one's for the Kamdesh Siege. November 2009. She held a field hospital for 11 hours against insurgent assault. No air support. No reinforcements. 17 field surgeries performed under active fire. No losses. Everybody she touched walked out." He set the shadow box down with the care of a man placing folded flags in a mother's hands. "You can't fire that," Mercer said simply. "Not without making sure everyone knows who she is." The door opened again. And this time, it wasn't a staff member or a chaplain. Rear Admiral Richard Vance had come to Norfolk for a naval conference. 68 years old. Joint Chiefs briefing schedule. Scheduled to speak at the naval station that evening. He heard the commotion in the corridors, heard a chaplain's voice and a medic's voice and something that sounded like recognition, and his curiosity, the same curiosity that had kept him alive through 43 years of service, made him detour. He saw the shadow box before anyone said a word. His face changed. Something in his eyes shifted from command to something deeper. Something like honor recognizing itself. "Major Cooper," he said quietly. And then he looked directly at Dr. Prescott. "You fired her." It wasn't a question either. Vance recited her commendations the way other men recited prayers. Bronze Star with Valor. Pause. Purple Heart. Another pause. The weight of each word settling like a sandbag. Meritorious Service Medal. He picked up the dog tag. Held it to the light. "You know what this means? This broken chain? She was wearing this when the IED detonated. It should have killed her. Instead, she spent the next 6 hours extracting wounded. 12 soldiers walked out of Fallujah because of her. 12. He set the tag down like it was made of something more than metal. And you terminated her employment." The door opened one final time. This time, nobody expected it. The man in the dark suit didn't introduce himself until he showed his credentials. CIA, counterintelligence. He'd been in the hospital visiting a family member when the naval officer's arrival flagged in the system, when certain people started calling certain numbers about why a major asset was being fired from a civilian hospital. Valkyrie 6, the man said. Not a question. A code name whispered with reverence in certain circles, in certain briefings, in certain operations that would never show up in official records. You've been standing in this hospital the entire time, haven't you? Ashley didn't answer. She didn't need to. The man you saved, the CIA officer continued, Captain Marcus Hale. Do you know why we were tracking his condition so carefully? He didn't wait for an answer. You defied an evacuation order in 2009. You ignored direct command to extract. Saved 12 soldiers who were classified as losses. Hale court-martialed you for insubordination. But those 12 soldiers he testified against? 3 of them became operators. 1 became a handler. 2 are still active in counterterrorism. Their work has prevented attacks on U.S. soil. He looked directly at Prescott. The officer you fired just saved the life of the man who tried to destroy hers. And she did it anyway. That's not a protocol violation. That's operational security at the human level. But Dr. Prescott wasn't listening anymore. He was already thinking about damage control. Already reaching for his phone. Already planning the narrative he would take to the evening news, the careful framing, the sympathetic angle, the concerned physician trying to protect patients from an unstable former soldier with a vendetta. By 6 p.m., Dr. Robert Prescott was sitting across from an anchor at WVEC News 13, 600,000 viewers in the Norfolk market, his face composed and his voice steady. While we certainly appreciate Nurse Cooper's intentions, he said, the reality is that she was a dangerous rogue employee who routinely overstepped her training and endangered patient care. The military background doesn't change that she violated clear protocols. My job is to protect this hospital. The anchor nodded. Professional. Sympathetic. Some are calling her a hero. Heroes follow the rules, Prescott said. They don't make exceptions for themselves. The anchor touched her earpiece. Something was coming through. Her expression changed. She held up one finger, and Prescott saw something flicker across her face, that moment when a reporter realizes the story just got bigger. We have a caller on the line, she said carefully. Identifying himself as General Richard Vance, U.S. Army, retired. General, you're on the air. The voice that came through the speakers was granite and authority and something like controlled fury. Vance's voice had carried orders across battlefields for 40 years. It didn't need to be loud. Dr. Prescott, I'll correct your characterization. I served with Major Cooper in 2 theaters. I've seen her make decisions under fire that saved lives I was responsible for. What I need to correct for your viewers is your own record. Pause. Let it settle. You were discharged from the Army Medical Corps in 2008 for incompetence during a field posting. Multiple surgical error complaints. Conduct unbecoming. It's all on record. You're attacking a decorated combat veteran while your own military service ended in disgrace. Live television froze for exactly 2 seconds. The camera caught Prescott's face as the color drained, then rushed back, red spreading from his jaw to his hairline, his mouth opening and closing like a man trying to remember how to speak. The anchor leaned forward. Dr. Prescott, is this accurate? He ripped off his microphone. Stood. Walked off set while the camera kept rolling, capturing the whole catastrophic moment for 600,000 people to watch unfold. The video was viral within 90 minutes. By 11 p.m., the hospital board had called an emergency session. By 6:47 a.m. the next morning, Dr. Robert Prescott's termination letter had been signed by 4 administrators and 1 very angry admiral. 6 months later, a nurse named Sarah was walking through a strip mall in Virginia Beach, carrying bags from the grocery store, when she happened to glance through the window of an urgent care clinic. Sandwiched between a nail salon and a vape shop, the space was cramped and fluorescent. She recognized him immediately. Dr. Prescott was standing in a small exam room in a too-tight white coat, holding a patient file, treating a kid with a sprained ankle. He looked smaller than she remembered. Diminished. Just another tired medical provider working for per diem wages and insurance requirements, treating sinus infections and requesting payment cards. She kept walking. The final image nobody expected was Ashley returning to exactly where she belonged. The Veterans Affairs Hospital in Norfolk. The Combat Trauma Unit. Fresh scrubs. Employee badge reading RN, Combat Trauma Unit in small letters that carried more weight than any title ever could. She nodded to the veterans in the waiting room. They nodded back. The recognition of shared experience. The understanding that comes from having seen the things that break people and choosing to heal anyway. Her locker in the staff room was small. Like everything else about her, it was quiet. She pinned the dog tag to the inside of the door. The metal was dented from the blast that should have killed her. The chain was broken where shrapnel had cut through it. She positioned it next to a photo of Derek, taken last month, both of them smiling because they could finally afford to. Her finger traced the metal. The dog tags of people she couldn't save. The weight of command. The screams in dreams that were finally getting quieter. She had offers. The Admiral's office had called twice. The CIA officer had left a business card. Mercy General had sent a letter offering reinstatement and a significant raise. She turned down all of them. This was where she belonged. Among the people who understood what she carried. Among the soldiers who came back wrong and needed someone who knew how to sit with that wrongness without flinching. Among the voices that screamed in the dark and the hands that learned how to hold on. She dressed a wound on a veteran's leg. The man had been in Fallujah too. They didn't talk about it directly. Just understood. She cleaned the infection carefully, changed the dressing, and when she was done, he nodded, the way soldiers nod to each other across years and distance. True class is what you do when the lights go out. When nobody's watching. When there's no medal ceremony or press conference or phone call from the Pentagon. When it's just you and another broken person and your hand steady enough to help. Ashley Cooper chose this every single day. The quiet work. The invisible heroism. The daily decision to save lives in the shadows because that's who she'd always been, before the uniform and long after it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know who you really were, or if you've ever had to prove your value to people who judged you by appearance alone, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll send you stories about people just like you, the quiet warriors, the hidden legends, the ones who change everything when nobody's watching. Comment below, what would you do if you discovered the person you'd been fighting was the same person who'd saved your life?